Good evening, everyone. My name is David Elwood. I'm the dean here at the Harvard Kennedy School, and welcome to the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum. It's a really special evening tonight because we are very, very proud to be hosting the Secretary of Homeland Security, Janet Napolitano. It's also special because we feel especially safe tonight. And so, Madam Secretary, welcome to Harvard. I also want to thank the people that made this all possible. The Institute of Politics here at the Kennedy School organizes our events, the National Security Program, the Women in Public Policy Program, and the Harvard Kennedy School Women and Gender Caucus. Thank you all, and thank you, Madam Secretary, for being a part of things. Now, in a moment, I'm going to talk about this remarkable woman who has climbed many mountains, but I do want to remind everybody of the ground rules. I noticed there are a few protesters outside and so forth. Ground rules here at the Kennedy School are very, very simple. We invite remarkable people to come and share their ideas and their thoughts with us, and we make it very clear. Two rules are clear. Number one, no one can come and speak here unless they are willing to take free and unfettered questions from the audience. And in exchange, we let them speak free and unfetteredly during their remarks. So please honor that. If you do not honor that, I'm afraid we'll have to ask you to leave or be escorted out. So turning now to the more exciting moments at Vance, as I say, this is someone who climbs mountains and does remarkable things. She has a distinguished record of public service, working at many, many different levels of government. You may not know, but she began her career in law representing, among others, Anita Hill. And in 1993, she was appointed by President Bill Clinton, the United States Attorney for the District of Arizona. After serving in that role for 5 years, she successfully ran for Attorney General in 2002, and then won a very tight race, like 1,000 votes or something like that, for 11,824, but who was counting, to become governor. The next time she ran again, she managed to get 60% of the vote or some such number. Is that close enough? So she became, during her period as governor, a nationally recognized leader on issues ranging from Homeland Security and border security, immigration, and many things in the state. Indeed, she was named by Time magazine as one of the 5 best governors in America. Her hard work on things like education and solving the budget situation also led to her being recognized in 2006 when she won the Woodrow Wilson Award for Public Service, an award given by the Woodrow Wilson International Center at the Smithsonian. Other recipients, by the way, have included Colin Powell and Daniel Patrick Moynihan, so it's very, very high company. Then in 2009, President Barack Obama nominated her to become the Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security. And while serving as Secretary, she has focused on building collaborative relationships and partnerships, using science and technology to improve security, and implementing efficiency reviews at all levels in government. She's also quite focused on the question of how to get superb personnel involved. And we have ideas about that. I also said she's a climber of mountains. She has challenged many troubling issues and come out ahead. She's also, by the way, literally a climber of mountains, having climbed Mount Kilimanjaro. I don't think she's yet climbed Everest, but you could say what you're doing now is far tougher than that. She was the first woman chair of the National Governors Association, first woman to serve as Homeland Security Secretary. We're all very fortunate to have her with us today. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Janet Napolitano. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you. Thank you, and it's a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be asked to be at the Kennedy School Forum. I know it's something of a rite of passage, perhaps, for officials to come here to express their views and then engage in a famously tough round of questioning. But I have to respond to more than 80 different congressional committees and subcommittees, so I think I am used to a little bit of questioning, and I look forward to our session together. I have, many of my staff have been educated here at the Kennedy School, and some of them are actually with me here this evening, and will be happy to answer questions that I am not able to answer. And also, being here carries a special weight. Leaders have come to Harvard for many years to frame the significant issues our nation and indeed our world faces. George Marshall addressed graduates here at Harvard as Secretary of State, describing for them the colossal challenge of rebuilding a world torn apart by war. And in describing the scale of devastation after World War II, he told the students, quote, "The problem is one of such enormous complexity that the very mass of facts presented to the public by press and radio make it exceedingly difficult for the man in the street to reach a clear appraisement of the situation." Now, today, our country's challenges are quite different, and in our information age, so too are the ways the person in the street gets their information. But George Marshall's central point still rings true, and arguably it is more important than ever that our citizens have a clear understanding of today's security challenges. So tonight, I would like to share that clear appraisement of the situation because I believe the American people want and deserve candor about what we face. I'll talk about the threats we're seeing at the Department of Homeland Security, what we're doing to confront them, and what I think every American can do to help. And I should say that despite the sweeping name of my department, the responsibility within the federal government to keep our homeland secure does not lie solely with us. The United States military, the men and women who wear our country's uniform play an absolutely vital role. So too do the nation's intelligence agents, law enforcement officers, and our diplomats around the world. So it is truly a whole of government effort involving many departments and agencies coordinating their roles. Now, my department was created after September the 11th, 2001. And today, our first priority remains protecting against and preventing another terrorist attack on America. At DHS, we are constantly looking for ways to make it harder for terrorists to strike us and, by the way, to bounce back quickly if they do. Our department and our government substantially realigned itself so that we are confronting threats before they fully emerge. And over the past year, DHS has organized itself really to confront 4 categories of threats. The first would be foreign terrorists. We all recognize the desire of foreign terrorists to strike here at home. The attempt to blow up an American airliner on December the 25th was a stark reminder of how terrorists adapt their tactics to get around our security measures and to kill citizens from around the world. It's not just about keeping these people off of planes. It's also preventing terrorists from entering through our air, sea, and land ports of entry or along our thousands of miles of border and coastline. And it's detecting the presence of any chemical, biological, radiological, or nuclear weapon being smuggled into the country. Second, we're confronting a variety of domestic threats. You've all read about recent cases of, quote, home-based, close quote, terrorism, where men and women who often grew up here have become violent extremists, often following an interaction with a charismatic radicalizer online or in terrorist training camps abroad. Some of these individuals have ties to al-Qaeda or its affiliates, like David Headley, who just pled guilty for his role in the 2008 Mumbai terrorist attack, or Najibullah Zazi, who recently pled guilty to plotting to bomb the New York subways. Domestically, we're also dealing with lone wolf violence, individuals not connected to a terrorist cell or to a larger group, but who commit acts of public violence, often on behalf of a particular grievance. We're on guard against dangerous individuals or groups who would use employment to gain access to public places, like airports, malls, and train stations, or sensitive infrastructure like water treatment, chemical, or energy plants. And we're staying vigilant against possible spillover violence, particularly along our southwest border, where we are a strong partner with Mexico in taking the fight to the drug cartels in that area. A third category of threats are those involving cyberspace. Here, DHS is responsible for safeguarding our government's civilian computer networks against crime and against attacks. But this isn't some future threat. It is here now. We are confronting it every day. And the implications, not just for government, but for all of us, are enormous. Combating the cyber threat is going to require a partnership among government, academia, and the private sector, as ambitious and sustained as any our nation has ever seen. And I should underscore what the Dean said, particularly in this area. The Department of Homeland Security is seeking the best minds coming out of our universities to come join us in the effort to protect cyberspace. I'll give you our website here in just a moment. Finally, I would add a fourth kind of concern that we are trying to counteract, and that is the threat of complacency and of unrealistic expectations. Since I became secretary more than a year ago, I've emphasized that the American people need to be prepared, not scared. But rejecting the politics of fear doesn't mean the threats are any less real or that we shouldn't consider what they mean for our families and for our communities. In a world of fast-changing threats, we simply must resist the urge to become complacent or cynical about what's before us. We must not leave ourselves, our families, and our communities less than fully prepared. Now, when I spoke about the threats from terrorism in remarks last year at the Council on Foreign Relations, I argued that our adversaries were every bit as networked as the society around us. The very same networks that the vast majority of us use to connect and to build, those small few use to recruit and to destroy. And amid the social media revolution that we are steeped in, violent extremists have also harnessed the power of YouTube, of MySpace, and of Twitter to target vulnerable individuals. When Facebook was invented in a dormitory here on the Harvard campus, could anyone imagine that just 5 years later, among its 400 million worldwide users, extremists calling for violence against America a half a world away would be utilizing its resources? Now, all of you are aware of how online education has flourished. The internet has become a powerful distance learning tool for would-be terrorists as well. And just like the internet itself, the new terrorist threats are diffuse, they are versatile, and they are constantly evolving. Securing America against these threats, while simultaneously expediting the legal flow of people and commerce and staying true to the values and rights that define our nation, is the essence of the 21st century enterprise that we call Homeland Security. So to succeed, we need to be fast, we need to be flexible, and we need to be creative. So how is the Department of Homeland Security countering these types of threats? First, keeping terrorists and other criminals out of the country is a fundamental responsibility for the department. Right now, for example, we are pursuing a historic international aviation security initiative to strengthen a system that has been an engine for growth and prosperity both here and abroad for the past 50 years. But it is a system on which we all rely, but it has weak links. And therefore, all nations share the threats to that system as well as the responsibility for safeguarding it. If you have flown lately, you may have noticed a heightened law enforcement presence. and some new screening procedures around the country. That will continue, and those procedures will continue to evolve to stay ahead of any new threats. But the United States government does not conduct screening abroad, so we are working closely with international partners to make sure that we address weak links, so that terrorists cannot exploit a security gap in one country to gain access to the entire global aviation network. In fact, just this month, we instituted a new real-time threat-based screening policy for all air carriers with international flights to the United States, superseding emergency measures we had to put in place after December the 25th. We are also working to secure strong international agreements so that all of our allies and international partners can benefit from one another's intelligence about known terror suspects. And this goes beyond just aviation security. We are using the logic of information sharing and threat-based protocols to implement a smart, strategic approach to passenger and cargo screening at all of our sea and land ports. So it's air, it's sea, and it's land. Second, we are working to better understand and counter the threat from individuals already in this country. We're primarily doing that by ensuring that state, local, and tribal law enforcement have access to information and to intelligence about the threats we face so that they can confront them on the front lines. By sharing information, we are enlisting them in our terrorism prevention efforts. And by receiving information from them and sharing it among our federal partners, we are maximizing the chance for success at each level. And as DHS increases the capacity of our law enforcement partners to understand and analyze local trends, we are becoming a more valuable resource to the communities themselves. Indeed, we are working hard to build trust, to learn from, and to share our resources and experience with communities to help them combat violent extremists, here or abroad, that target vulnerable individuals. As President Obama's counterterrorism advisor, John Brennan, recently said, keeping our country safe and protecting our sons and daughters from hateful ideologies demands trust and cooperation. Now, of course, science and technology also play an indispensable role in all the domains in which we work. Confronting emerging threats requires anticipating them and then getting out in front of them. For that reason, we are investing heavily in research and in development, with a strong focus on the chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear threats that have the potential to cause the greatest harm. What does this look like? It means we are accelerating the deployment of new explosive detection equipment, advanced imaging technology, and canine teams at our airports. We are supporting research to better understand and detect suspicious behavior as well as chemical and biological agents. We are partnering with universities and private industry to study threats to agriculture, to critical infrastructure, to the food supply chain. And we are working with law enforcement and the private sector to counter the threat of improvised explosive devices. We're also taking unprecedented steps along the nation's southern border. Much of the violence we are now seeing in Mexico is the result of drug cartels fighting to control turf and to protect their illegal activities and profits. We are working with and supporting Mexico in this fight in very significant ways, including providing technical support, resources, and training, sharing information and intelligence, conducting joint operations along the border, and sending more of our own DHS personnel into Mexico to work with their counterparts. Let me just pause and say that I have been working border issues since 1993. And I have never seen this level of cooperation and commitment between our two nations. Now, next, to combat the rapidly evolving threats from cyberspace, we are moving quickly on two fronts. First, we are moving to secure our nation's civilian computer networks against attack. And second, we are working with the private sector and the public to increase the overall level of security. One important part of this is educating and informing Americans. Last month, I announced a competition using what we call a wisdom of crowds approach to increasing cyber literacy. Our National Cybersecurity Awareness Campaign Challenge is open to experts and non-experts alike and rewards innovative ways of spreading the word about how the public can help secure the country simply by making their own online habits more secure. By the way, the challenge is open till April the 30th. I invite you to join it at www.dhs.gov. And I will just tell you that the winner gets to have lunch with me. Lastly, to fight against complacency, to make our nation more ready and more resilient, we are working to engage and empower the public to take the most basic steps, to get an emergency kit, to make an emergency plan, to be informed. Are we there yet at that basic level? The answer is no. So we need all families, all communities, all of our businesses to be talking about their plans and thinking about how to get smarter and better equipped to deal with a range of potential emergencies. And how do we get there? Well, the government certainly has a role, and part of that role is being straight about the nature that the threats that we face. And part of it is continuing to work day and night and to constantly ask ourselves if we're doing everything we can to prevent another attack. But making a habit out of preparedness, making it a part of our culture, will ultimately draw on the innovation and the civic spirit of the American people. And our nation has never lacked for that. Now, in the past, we have heard some argue that to defeat terrorism, the United States government has to be right 100% of the time, while the terrorists only have to be right once. I reject that premise. We cannot put a glass dome over our country. We cannot guarantee there will not be another successful attack. No one can. But we are a strong, resilient country, and we must resolve that even a successful attack will not defeat our way of life. We can target our resources against emerging threats and evolving risks. We can better empower the American public and draw on what President Obama has called our greatest national security asset, our values. But it is those values that define us as a nation. And those values will always be a force more powerful than the ideology, the murderous ideology of a tiny few. So let us be clear about what victory against terrorism and violent extremism actually means. Democracy and freedom have stood the test of time. They are superior in every way to the perverse narrative, killers and criminals, which is what terrorists really are. We must leverage the shared American values that have led us to victory before. And every single one of us can become smarter, can become better informed, can become better prepared. That becomes possible when the man on the street knows and understands the kinds of threats I've described here this evening. On a concrete level, Americans have to work to build preparedness, to ensure that our communities are prepared to address any danger that comes their way, from terrorist threats or indeed from natural disasters. And on a more abstract level, Americans must work to build resilience, the ability to get up and come back even stronger if we get hit. And that doesn't come from a set of government programs. That comes from the heart of the American people. It knows no ethnic, religious, racial, or other boundaries, and no violent fringe can take it away. We will need that resilience to fight today's emerging threats. just as we did in the days after Pearl Harbor and in the days after 9/11. Our nation has faced down violent radical movements before. We've witnessed terrorism at home and abroad, and we could have witnessed it again someday. So in big ways and in small, resilience has to be a pillar of our security. We saw it in the passengers who took matters into their own hands on September the 11th, and indeed on December the 25th of this past year, or indeed of the security personnel who saved lives at Fort Hood or at the Pentagon just last month. All of those examples could have ended differently, but the resilience and the sense of shared responsibility that kicked in each time took them in another direction. Terrorism is a tactic designed not just to kill, but to make us feel powerless. And we are never powerless. We control the way we prepare ourselves, the way we anticipate and combat threats, and the way we respond if something should indeed occur. America is a strong nation. It is a resilient nation. And as we confront these new threats, we will use our values and our way of life as the most powerful source of strength. And we will do that for today, for now, for years to come. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. We now turn to question and answer. I just want to remind everybody about how it all works. First of all, there are 4 microphones. One's right here, another one is here, third one is there, and fourth one is here. The rules of the good Kennedy School question, there are 3 characteristics. First, you start by identifying yourself. Second, you ask 1 question with 1 thought. And third, it's short, and it ends with a question mark. With that, let's start right here.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. My name is Josh Zagorski. I'm an undergrad here at Harvard. My question is about 2 months ago, a Texan man crashed his airplane into an IRS office building. Why was that not called or labeled a terrorist act?
Well, you know, the use of aircraft and the use of aircraft against a government facility is certainly a terrorist tactic. I think it was not defined necessarily as terrorism, in part because it was not going to be charged at all because it was fatal, but also because charging something as terrorism is different than if a terrorist tactic is used.
Right up here.
Think about it.
Thank you, Madam Secretary, also for being here today. My name is Richard Coffin. I'm a junior here at Harvard. And my question is, we've been hearing more recently in the media about people, especially students, who have been deported, even though they're, of my age. They've been in this country for almost their entire lives, and in every case, they're pretty much as American as I am. And I was just curious why we insist on deporting these specific individuals.
Well, your question really gets to the heart of an undone matter, and that is comprehensive immigration reform. President Obama is seeking that. We have been working on that with the Congress, and part of that would be a provision that would allow students who are in that type of a situation to remain in the country, to be legalized, as it were. You sometimes hear that referred to as the DREAM Act provisions. So while we are focused in our immigration enforcement on going after, as we did today, after huge organized crime rings that were bringing people into the country illegally, the plain fact of the matter is that there are cases of hardship that occur driven by the law that underlies our immigration policy right now. I hope that the Congress, now that health care is done, and they have finished moving on that, that immigration reform becomes one of the next major projects undertaken, and I know the President hopes that as well.
Right up here.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Vanessa Cardenas, and I'm here with the Executive Leadership Program. And my question to you is that in Arizona, a bill just passed, the most extreme anti-immigrant bill, that's pretty much making it a crime for the undocumented to be in Arizona. And given the fact that you were governor in Arizona, what are your views on the bill, and what advice would you give to Governor Brewer right now?
Well, 2 points I would say, and that is that when I was governor, I vetoed similar legislation twice. And I think my views on that legislation were well expressed when I vetoed it. But secondly, it goes back to this question, because in the immigration world now are issues that are continuing to pop up because we have not readjusted, reformed our immigration laws to meet the needs of today. And what we should not have in our country is a patchwork of different laws in different states. But I'm afraid we are going to see more and more of that unless and until we can get comprehensive reform addressed.
Right over here.
How you doing, Janet?
Hey.
Over here.
Oh, hey.
My name is AJ Casilla. I work for TSA, and I want to thank you
All
for
right.
your service. Thank you for coming to Cambridge. I have a question, and it basically affects 40,000 officers. You, as our boss, came here today and talked about how important it is that we operate on the great values that make our country the best. One of those values that we think about every day at TSA is equal rights and protections at the workplace, collective bargaining. You went before Congress and you backed us up and you said, I don't see it endangering security one bit, and I appreciate that. You, as our boss, overseeing all the agencies, have the power with the stroke of a pen to write an administrative order rescinding that ban against collective bargaining. And my officers wanted me to ask you, when will you do it?
We are, in fact, I met with a number of leaders just last week, and let me reiterate my position. I believe that public safety and security and collective bargaining are not mutually exclusive. I think that is a false dichotomy. We have been, quite frankly, waiting for there to be a TSA administrator put in place because that person would be in charge of implementing whatever arrangement or agreement was reached. As you may have noticed, it's taken a little while to get an administrator nominated. So we are continuing to move through and talk with leadership and worker leadership to see what our next steps are going to be.
Right over here.
Secretary Napolitano, thank you so much for being here. My name is Brendan Ravage Sewell. I'm a second-year graduate student here at the Kennedy School, also a former resident of Phoenix, Arizona, when you were governor.
Excellent.
My question is actually about, it's related to immigration reform. Specifically, I'm wondering what you think the crucial elements will be for a comprehensive plan and what the implications will be for children. Because when I was in Phoenix, I was a teacher, and a number of my Latino Hispanic students were actually American citizens by birth, but had parents and relatives who were undocumented workers. And I think we often forget about that in this debate, that there are children involved here who have rights as American citizens. So could you maybe just talk about what your aspiration is for a comprehensive immigration reform plan and what the implications are for children?
Yeah. Well, I think that for immigration reform, the framework was actually set forth by Senator Schumer and Graham in a bipartisan op-ed several weeks ago that the president endorsed. It includes updating some of the enforcement provisions. For example, there are provisions involving our ability to prove cases against employers where, quite frankly, some of the fines and other sanctions that we can get are not adequate to serve as a deterrent for employers to use legal labor as opposed to illegal labor. So there are tools and other things that need to be updated on the enforcement side. We need to deal with issues of future flows of immigrants, and also family unification. It goes a little bit to the children's issue. And then we need to deal firmly and realistically with those who are already in the country illegally. And what do I mean by that? There needs to be a process in place whereby they get right with the law, where they register, where we get their biometrics, where we have done a criminal background check, where they pay a fine or some other financial penalty for having violated the law and have coming into the country. But at a certain point, they are allowed to stay, which will, now circling back to your question, have the benefit of helping solve that problem. Because you're right, I saw this all the time as the U.S. Attorney for Arizona, the AG of Arizona, and the Governor of Arizona, where you literally had families where the parents were not here legally, but the children were U.S. citizens. Well, what do you do then? And what happens when, and this happens, we see this all the time, and it's very tough when the parents themselves have to be deported from the country. Do the children go? Do they stay?
Right up here.
Good evening, Secretary Napolitano. Thank you so much for being here. My name is Katie Zavadsky. I'm a student at the college. My question is about domestic terrorism and specifically threats from right-wing groups and individuals against abortion clinics and providers. What is the DHS doing to combat these threats, and how do you determine where their right to freedom of speech crosses the line?
This is an issue that is us, but it also involves local law enforcement, and it involves the FBI and others who are charged with protecting the public safety while we respect First Amendment freedoms. Sometimes there are difficult judgments that need to be made. What we look and what we do at the department is we see ourselves as providing information about threats and threat streams to local law enforcement on the ground in communities where there may be a clinic or another site that is the possible target, and receiving information back. And the threat, doesn't, or information about the kind of a threat it is doesn't really have or need to have an ideological label, an adjective like right-wing or left-wing or what have you. What it's really about, and where you really start crossing the line, is when you move from a threat to actually beginning to acquire the means to commit a violent act. For example, and then you share that tactical information about what's going on so that law enforcement knows what to watch out for. For example, recent cases involved explosives made with hydrogen peroxide, right, as a primary ingredient. Well, the way we would handle that is to push information out that says that there is credible intelligence that there's planned attacks using these kinds of explosives, using hydrogen peroxide. You may want to check with the beauty product suppliers in your area to see if they have seen any abnormal purchases of hydrogen peroxide. So it's keeping things based on facts and tactics, and then looking for concrete movement forward beyond speech that moves over that line. But as your question presumes, it's sometimes difficult to tell.
Right up here.
Greetings, Madam Secretary. I'm Rosemary Ibarra Hernandez from Phoenix, Arizona. Why did you leave us? I am Gloria
I don't know, but
Ibarra's
anybody want to
sister.
buy a condo in Phoenix? I've been able to sell mine. Anyway, go ahead.
I am Judge Gloria Ibarra's sister, graduate of Harvard Law. You know her well.
Very
She
much
was your
so.
former employee. I bring greetings from Representative Robert Mesa. And I am from Aguila Youth Leadership Institute. We danced with you in your office at one point. And I know that you support students going off to university. But I want to talk about tactics, and that is when crossing to another state, that my family, we were stopped 3 times and questioned, and yet those who weren't brown were let go. I want to understand what is going to happen in terms of racial profiling.
Yeah. Well, obviously, racial profiling is not anything that anybody condones. It is not an American value, and it is not a value underlying effective law enforcement. And so I can't talk to who stopped you or why or whatever, but I can say this, that our efforts, both with CBP and with ICE, are focused on identifying those in the country illegally who have already committed crimes, so we know that they have committed crimes, or if we are dealing with, for example, the incarcerated population, to make sure that everyone's criminal background is being checked, not just people of a particular heritage or ethnicity. Like I said, I can't respond to that. All I can say is when I was Attorney General, we had the first ever statewide declaration against racial profiling, signed at that time by every sheriff, among others, in Arizona. We continually work to prevent and train and supervise, which is when you're working with law enforcement. Training and supervision are the ways to resolve those issues. And that in terms of immigration enforcement, we are focused really on the deportation and removal of those who have been violating our criminal laws as well.
Right down here.
Madam Secretary, thank you for coming to speak with us.
I'm looking at your shirt, man.
Yeah.
Very nice.
This is, different kind of Homeland Security.
Yeah.
The original Homeland. Anyway, so I have a question about a different kind of terrorism than you addressed here today. Your office has been working hard to enlist local law enforcement to perform immigration enforcement policies or tactics, policies that have been traditionally done by the ICE and the federal enforcement branch. However, the Office of the Inspector General recently put out a report damning the management of 287G, which is one of your premier policies for accomplishing this devolution. And the Washington Post reported recently on quotas that your office has been demanding, immigration detention quotas, despite the administration's promise to only go after people who are accused of crimes. So my question is, how are you going to ensure that these policies don't end up putting power in the hands of activist sheriffs like Joe Arpaio, who frankly have been just rousing people up in this racist fervor? It's gotten really untenable. So how are you planning to address that?
I'm really glad you asked that question, because it provides me the opportunity to clarify 2 areas that are misunderstood. 287G, for those of you who don't practice in this area, is a law by which, under certain circumstances, state and local law enforcement can have a memorandum with federal law enforcement to help carry out the immigration function. When I took office, the 287G agreements then in place were very broad and not confined to any particular type of activity. We have since rewritten them and focused them exclusively on 2 things. One is participating with federal government, so you're with a federal officer on fugitive or felony gang activities, or conducting criminal background checks in jails. We have, under those two models, then instituted a series of supervisory checks that didn't exist before. The Inspector General's report, to which you refer, is post those reform. I mean, is pre those reforms. In other words, it doesn't look at 287G as it is actually currently being carried out. So that is on a, you know, those are the kinds of things you deal with in a situation like mine. The IG reports often trail badly behind actual changes or reforms that have already entered into the system. Secondly, we are employing something called secure communities, but what that is about is, and as I mentioned it to an earlier questioner, is simply providing the database by which anybody who is being booked into a jail, and we are focused on level 1 and level 2 offenders, will have their immigration status checked as well as their criminal background checked. Oh, I'm sorry, the quotas issue. Yes, that was immediately, that was an email by an employee who has been disciplined. It went out without authorization. It was immediately repudiated by the head of ICE, among others, and it in no way, no how reflects the policies or the practice of the Department of Homeland Security under my leadership.
Right here.
Hello. My name is Michelle Rudy. I'm the great-granddaughter of Russian immigrants. How many people here, their parents were born in another country? Raise your hand. Or your grandparents? Great-grandparents? Your great-grandparents?
Grandparents.
Grandparents. Where did they come from?
Italy.
Italy, okay. Duh. All right. So I started asking questions about my family's history. My great-grandparents came through Ellis Island in 1911. I started asking these questions when I was working with immigrants here in Massachusetts. I was on the ground when the raid happened 3 years ago in New Bedford. I was in that church basement when hundreds of families came in, one father bringing a baby who the mother had been taken, the baby was breastfeeding. And the father was carrying the baby and said the baby was trying to breastfeed from him. I said, how could this happen in my country? Today in Arizona, 800 officers are going into supermarkets, are going into homes. People are scared. One woman miscarried because of the fear and the stress. You care about people's safety. That's why you have this leadership position, but people are fearful. They're feeling terrorized, and you have the opportunity to do something about it if you stop the raids. Will you do so?
Well, let me, first of all, I appreciate what underlies your question. We are a nation of immigrants. We are also a nation of laws. And the question is about the law and how we enforce the law. Let me return to the central point. Every point you've made, the individual over here made, you made, all illustrates why it is that there is a crying need for immigration reform. Until that happens, however, when I took the oath of office, when President Obama took the oath, when we took the oaths of office, we took an oath to uphold the laws. So the question then is, well, how do you do that? And how do you make and make the right and make priorities that really work to go after the most culpable, those that are making the most profit out of human misery, for example, and the like. Now, you mentioned, please let me finish. It's my turn now. You mentioned the issues in Arizona today. Well, what that's about is an investigation, which is exactly how law enforcement ought to be done, which is targeting an entire industry, they're called camionetas, which has been making thousands of dollars out of trafficking in human beings, families, children, and the like, and taking down the leadership of that industry and everybody involved in that industry all together. That is not the kind of raid to which you are referring, which was not done under my leadership in our department. It would not be the way that we would do such an activity today. Nor indeed, I think, if my predecessor were standing here now learning what he learned about that activity, would it be done under his leadership either. That's not what we're doing. What we're talking about is law enforcement. Now, it's a law you may not like, and it's clear that most of you don't. It's clear that I view this as a law that needs to be changed. I've written and spoken about this for years, and I've tried to advocate as aggressively as I can the need to change the underlying law. But we also need to make smart and effective enforcement decisions, and that's what we are doing. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Please, one per person. Please, thank you. Thank you very much. You've had your point. Right up here, please.
Okay. Well, Madam Secretary, good evening. My name is Alexander Rassolimo. I'm president of a think tank, the Center for Security and Social Progress. Now, maritime security is a critical issue for the United States and for the world. The terrorists in Mumbai last year came from the sea. Now, in the United States, about 6% of cargo containers were being inspected prior to unloading as of a year or 2 years ago. And shipping containers potentially can be used to smuggle a weapon of mass destruction to this country. So my question is, what is the Department of Homeland Security doing, and what are its plans in the area of maritime security?
Yeah, when you talk to maritime, you're really talking about container and cargo and the like, sir? Yeah. A number of things. First of all, we have incorporated a system which allows us to get documentation about what's in those containers and cargo before they're actually loaded onto ships. Secondly, we have standardized globally the kind of information that needs to be provided before the cargo can be loaded. And then using a certain percentage of random algorithms, we pull some of them aside for further inspection. That's in addition to what is being scanned for evidence, for example, of radiological material using other kinds of devices. But it's really a layered risk-based strategy designed to increase the likelihood or minimize the risk that contraband can enter the country via sea. You bet.
Time for just one more question, right here.
Good evening, Secretary Napolitano. My name is Ana Rosa Rizzo, and I'm mayor for the city of Maywood. And I'm here, I actually put on my Facebook what my constituents wanted me to ask you. And the top questions were about Sheriff Arpaio and also the legislation that was passed in Arizona. While I know both questions have been asked before, I feel like I still need more of an answer around the question of people like Sheriff Arpaio, because people like him create climates of fear. And I feel like as policymakers, we need to be very clear about what our policies are doing as far as creating a climate of fear where our end goal of safety does not get achieved because there's such a fear between the community and the police where crimes don't get reported and our communities end up being less safe because of people like him. And then policymakers, local policymakers like us who are on the front line seeing what's happening to low-wage immigrants, you know, on a daily basis, want to pass policies to help protect our residents from damaging policies like those.
Well, I think you can. I mean, in the sense that there's nothing that mandates that communities, say, for example, apply for a 287G agreement. And there's nothing that says if you apply, you're going to be given one. Indeed, with respect to Sheriff Joe, as you know, we took away his authority to participate in task forces because he would not agree to the oversight that we require. In the jail, we had not had problems there, and that was not the issue, but it was the task force, so we took that away. But again, I'm going to return back to my central theme. As policymakers, you all can be advocates, you can be and are certainly voters, and all the rest. And Washington, D.C. Needs to hear that it is now time to move on immigration, updating, on reform, on addressing these issues, on not putting a face on immigration reform that doesn't allow us to move forward in a productive way. Recognizing, again, as I said to the questioner over here, look, we are a nation of immigrants, and that is part of our value system. I'm going to be swearing in a number of new citizens tomorrow while I'm at Boston. And it's one of the great pleasures I have as the secretary. But laws that we do have also have to be enforced. And so if we want a better set or a different set of laws for that, there's nobody in this room that can't play a role in achieving that kind of reform. And making that advocacy well known. And I hope you do.
Madam Secretary, let me take the control of my, having the opportunity to be here at the podium to ask you one last question, which is there are a lot of people here in the audience that aspire to be leaders. You've been a leader in all kinds of different ways, public leaders. Do you have any bit of advice, any bit of hint? What does it take to really be an effective leader at these very, very difficult times where everyone's looking for superb leadership?
Well, I think you have to set clear priorities. You have to have a clear vision that's articulated for your department, your employees. And there's, you have to have a little bit of a thick skin, and you have to have a bit of a sense of humor. And I think those kinds of combinations allow you to take on different roles in positions where oftentimes there are no easy answers, and what you are there to do is to push forward and to make sure in this job, for example, that we maintain the safety and security of the American public.
Thank you very much, Secretary.
Thanks, Dean.
Well done.